I'm curious before we get into the serious questions, why penguins? And also what is the rationale for marketplace? Did you do any kind of iteration on how to position this? What's the behind the scenes of those?
Sure. So the penguins are kind of my fault, for lack of a better way to put it. I just had this image in my head of penguins and tech kind of being synonymous, just probably from Linux back in the day. So like when I think of penguins, I think of tech, and then I was like, but there's different types of penguins, and like we got to have different penguins for different problems, and that's where the different category characters came from. And we kind of wanted to do something to kind of make all of the different penguins cohesive. So that's where like the red sunglasses come from, where they're all wearing some version of red sunglasses, either on their forehead or on their face. It just kind of to me made like this big scary unknown of AI a little bit more accessible to the masses.
That's cool. That's really, I like it. Yeah, I like the cohesiveness of the brand. It's really together in a cool way. What about on the marketplace side? Is there intention around how you're positioning that? And I understand you're using it as a lead generator effectively for an academy type position or L&D play, as well as a lead generator for your services play. But are people already looking for AI marketplaces, or did you kind of do any Google Trends to see what type of searches?
So there are a handful of marketplaces out there, and what we found is from the ones that are kind of the most popular, they're extremely technical. Like they're very technically focused. They're not geared towards people that don't already know about AI. And that was kind of the gap that we saw in the market that we wanted to get into. And when we were thinking of starting this company, we kind of discussed it as we would love to be involved in part of the AI revolution, right? And as we thought about it more, it's like, well, there's a lot of people that are way smarter than us that are going to build a better model or a better agent or bot or whatever, and we don't want to be part of that arms race. So, what is it that we can kind of bring to the table as our secret sauce, and that kind of leans into our skill sets? And that's where the idea of a marketplace came up. Is we wanted to kind of be the picks and shovels of the AI revolution, where we don't know which of these products and solutions are going to win eventually in the market. But regardless of who wins and loses, we wanted to kind of be part of that future, that future state. So we felt like we're going to be somewhat kind of agnostic to all the really impressive, cool, purpose-built solutions that other people are building, and we'll just kind of come along for the ride and iterate and adjust as we learn more and more. And as you said, the marketplace also uh, acts as kind of a synergy with kind of the learning and the professional services.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really cool idea. And we're professional services just full bore. So if you guys ever get a really interesting or bespoke ask, but you know where to find us, right? So I
And that's kind of what's cool about it, right? Is like, we're all kind of exploring and learning about this stuff together. And yeah, like as we get, professional services requests that are more in your guys' wheelhouse, then, there can be a partnership there that benefits everyone. And yeah, it's a really, really cool opportunity.
Yeah, very cool.
Totally.
Very cool. Ryan, Keith, do you all have any general questions before we get into the kind of script or the show notes?
Oh, I have a question I could ask for sure. So I think that something that is like very clear to me is that you're solving like this problem that we encounter all the time, which is like just to tell it by anecdote. Like I will go in a hole and like research all these AI products, build this AI stuff with Ryan, and come out and be like, "Oh, you don't understand." Like talk to other people about it and realize I'm speaking a different language all of a sudden, and be like, "Oh, well, it's not that complicated. You just haven't read all of these things that we've read or done all these things that we've done." Right. And so I think that like what I find a lot is like when the rubber hits the road, it's like people feel the need to have AI, like what I imagined it felt like to need a computer when they were invented. I can't, it doesn't feel like the internet to me. That's not the same thing.
Right.
Like to
It's
me,
like
it's like a lot of
FOMO,
the,
right? Like,
yeah,
like
like a lot,
it's like everyone feels some version of FOMO.
yeah, exactly. They feel some version of FOMO. And I mean, to me, it's like like ChatGPT was the first tech product where like when it came out, I was excited and I showed it to like my like aunts and uncles, and they were all like, they usually pretend to give a crap if I'm interested in something, and they were like, wait, that thing's talking. And so like I feel like once people see that, and all of a sudden it's like these Harry Potter spells exist in the form of prompts or whatever, like they need to figure out what to do. And I'm curious, like when the rubber hits the road, that seems to be like where you've inserted yourself. What are you finding on the ground? Like who are your customers? How's it going? Like what are you seeing is the disconnect between the technology and the
Yeah,
what people.
I think the biggest disconnect is you've got all of these business owners that kind of fall outside of I'll say like what is traditionally considered like the cutting edge. So like, the tech sector is all kind of getting involved in some flavor of AI for the most part. But when you leave the tech sector and you start talking about like your local HVAC guy or just like any kind of home services or like another small business owner that's doing something with logistics or like the list goes on and on. You've got these small businesses that they are aware of AI, everyone is, but they have no idea what that means for them, and they tend not to have tech folks on staff or like kind of thinking about these things in real time. So they're going to have questions or challenges, or they just don't really know where to start. So in a lot of our conversations with them, there's kind of this education that needs to happen to even just zoom out and say, okay, so AI is going to be happening, and if you're looking for a leg up on your competitors, let's talk about what that looks like, or let's talk about how we can find something right off the shelf, or maybe something more custom for you to start to move the needle so that AI, instead of this being this big, scary, unknown thing that's going to take over the world, let's have it start adding value within your business right away.
If I can share one example of this, my family runs a plumbing business down in South Texas. I grew up plumbing from 13 to 18, and during it was Winter Storm Uri that hit Texas and froze the state. I don't know if you're aware of this or
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
The plumbing business was under like significant duress back in 2020. The call volume increased by like 400% overnight, broken pipes, broken water wells. And, it got to the point where the phone was ringing off the hook such that we couldn't even plan our day. And we just unplugged the phone from the wall. I mean, which isn't a great strategy when you're trying to run a business, right? But it was just like we were talking, about jobs and like the phone was just going and going, right? And so as the guys were going out and fixing water wells, I said, hey, I have to stay back and I have to solve this problem for our inbound and our leads. We can't leave a woman without water, or an old lady. Livestock can be in the multiple millions of dollars of value. You can't miss those jobs. You have to help people protect their assets. Just in a day with Google Voice, switching our number to be a digital number and able to have an automated dialer that allowed people to leave a message, capture details. We were able to transcribe every inbound call into an email inbox. And then we were able to actually use ChatGPT in its earliest forms to do some synthesis and determine like a job approach or, staff the truck properly with supplies. And so if Google Voice and some of their automated transcription isn't on the marketplace, I think it's a huge win for small businesses, especially your HVAC, your plumbers. And, we were able to take advantage of that because I was down there on weekends helping the family out, but not everybody has those kind of resources. And so the marketplace and the ability to like get on a call with Jerry, find those types of interventions. I mean, there's going to be a boon to small business efficiency and quality, I think, in the very near future. Kind of like what Keith often says is, if all innovation were to stop in LLMs, there's 10 years of implementation in small businesses alone that will help those businesses grow, be more reasonable, maybe the entrepreneur's lifespans, extend less, less heart attacks, hopefully, right?
Sure.
So it's really cool what you're doing, and the HVAC example just resonated with me for
Sure.
sure.
And when you created that, you said between 13 and 18. So you still weren't like this big technical guru that's like been educated in all of this.
Well, now the winter storm happened in 2020, so I was, more adept. Year,
Okay.
but I was,
I think it would have been your job regardless, man.
but
If it happened,
but
if
so
it
what's
happened back in 2013, you still would have done it.
yeah, what's interesting about that point though is that by being the one who ran phones back when I was younger and creating the job tickets, even though I had been out of the business for over a decade, when I went back in, all of the systems were still the same, right? The invoice creation was the same. So nothing had really innovated. And that's not a knock on anybody running small businesses. I love my uncle to death. I think that what it really is that there's just not the capacity to innovate whenever it's about completing a job to put bread on the table. People aren't just exploring AI for the sake of AI, like they're trying to solve repeating and painful issues that happen that they're just so used to just dealing with, right? They just do this thing because they know that that's going to get the money through the door. They're not necessarily able to like scale or grow or, in the
Right.
ways that we think about it as, I think, technology companies.
Yeah, the sentence that I try to that seems to hit home is you want to be able to work on your business, not in your business. And this kind of unlocks that possibility if done right. The other area that I feel like is going to be huge is medicine in general. So there's kind of, to simplify, there's like two sides to it, right? There's like the administrative side, like, checking in patients, managing patient records, insurance claims and stuff like that. And then there's like actually making kind of medicine accessible through AI to places where it might not otherwise be received, or to kind of act as like an additional layer of quality on top of existing physicians and stuff. So I come from one of those families where, everyone, we're first generation from Iran. So in Persian culture, my cousins and I, like everyone is either like a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure. So like it really kind of like brings to the forefront the opportunity that exists within medicine, and that there's so much, like, it's surprising how much inefficiency exists within medicine, and like how could the stakes possibly be higher, right? We're talking about people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very cool. Very cool. Ryan, do you have any questions before I move on to the next point, or any thoughts that you just want to ask with Jerry?
Yeah, I'm curious, like on the marketplace side, like how, you guys started, when did you launch? Just
But we launched about 2 months ago. So
okay, so pretty recent.
yeah, like we're having lots of kind of ongoing conversations with small businesses, like well before we launched, obviously. But yeah,
And so like uh, similar to Eli, so my parents own a diner. My grandparents owned it before. And I've done a lot of, like all of us, cut teeth, building small websites for people, coming up through agencies, built a lot of e-commerce sites, familiar with a lot of I was thinking yesterday, I was like, man, I feel like it's a treat to us, who came up in the like 2010s, like doing agency style work, that like now we get to like finally go back to all of the people who we never could help and just like, oh yeah, I can literally code you up a site for basically free. And because like you were a nice person to me, like when I was coming up, and I can just help you out now. And like I find like in the last few weeks, I feel like I've just been able to do that a bunch for people, and it's been really pleasant. And but one of the things that I'm curious about, as you think about the marketplace and expanding it, and I know it's too early, is how do you see this evolving from a social aspect? From, obviously, your business model is referrals to these tools and such, right? So how do you see this all kind of coming together, where you're stitching together not just I'm referring in people to Square, right, and getting paid, but I'm stitching together a bunch of these as like a recurring a la carte situation. What do you see as like the primitive or the template, that people might use going forward when they're, guys like us who know the landscape fairly well? What do you see as like the emerging construct for, yeah. the packaging of all of these things and the sets of things. I don't think that's quite in there just yet. Maybe it is more on the services side, but I want to
Sure. I
curious
mean,
about it.
this is a conversation that we're having as well, so open to real time feedback on it, right? But we're thinking of leaning into kind of the learning module or the learning aspect, and kind of evolving that eventually into a community. So we're gaining our social media, like traction on social media. We're going to keep growing each of our accounts and the content that we're publishing to various other platforms. And over time, we want to kind of build ourselves as a destination where people can come to have conversations and discuss different aspects of AI. And I think through those conversations and through what will hopefully eventually become a community, then I think that unlocks kind of all the different use cases that we could possibly want, and it delivers a lot more value to the customers, right? Reviews is eventually going to be one of the key value adds of our website, is people kind of reviewing tools that they're actively using. And I think community is kind of the beginning of getting to there.
Yeah, I mean the sort of kind of like what said before, another aphorism is like that we don't choose what to believe, we choose who to believe. And I think there's a lot of that in the space right now that we're picking up on. Is like, I have a friend who's working in AI, and I'm just going to default like the models, like I could trust them, but I know I should get some sanity checking. And we're, I think, experiencing a lot of that. And I'm just curious as to like where, well, maybe you can give an example, like how does that play out for you as you've like started to run this through and do that services in these early customer adoptions? Like, how do you format the conversation so that it's repeatable looking ahead, so that when new applications or integrations come onto the marketplace, it's going to be easy for you to cross sell, upsell, say which ones are compatible. Like I see on the marketplace, you guys show like, oh, these are available through an API, an SDK, what experience types. I'm curious, like how you think of that like section of the site expanding into this plays nicely with this. This plays nicely with this. What do you see as the future of that section of the site?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to like what is going to make us sticky, right? Like what's going to make people think of us for whatever the next problem is, or when we have like some new module or service or value that we want to deliver, how do we stay connected to the people that have previously come through our marketplace? Uh, I think that the community idea that I was talking about earlier is kind of one aspect of that. And I think the other is kind of building our own kind of social media and email lists, so that, eventually our blog posts get included in, quarterly newsletters where we talk about, here's what's happening in kind of the industry at large. Here's what's happening at Penguin Hub. Here's what you should be thinking about as a business owner that's navigating this more complex landscape that has changed a lot in the last 3 months. So it's kind of a little bit of a lot of different things that hopefully kind of increases kind of our engagement and value that we're delivering to customers, and for us, the lifetime value of those customers.
It makes me. I watched the Dumb Money movie last night, the Wall Street Bets movie, and it just makes me think of that for some reason. It's like apes together strong, and it's penguins together strong
Yes.
is the vibe that you're clearly going for. I think it's. I mean that if you can tap in, if you can get a meme behind you and get some tailwind on that, I think that's very powerful. Like it's just a question of where is that right pocket. Have you have you worked with any businesses thus far that are like you're working with two businesses doing an integration kind of at the same time, where they have some overlap, or they have the common need, or they're down the street from each other? Like, have you done that kind of community building yet?
Not yet, but we're very aware of the synergies there. So we're actively thinking about it from kind of a few different aspects, right? There's like what you said around like two people, like same situation, same problem, they would benefit just from being connected with each other.
Have you stitched together any like non-competitive businesses, basically?
Yeah, it was like I had this amazing point and now it's gone. No, it was Yeah, this premise of like, is there a world where we eventually evolve into someone who's going to be able to build something once and then use it multiple times? And it's something that we're actively talking about, but we honestly don't know to what extent that's going to be possible right now. Like, you guys are, I'm sure, way more on the front lines of this than we are, of like, it's so bespoke that, like, yeah, you can reuse some of the foundation, but the value that we're going to be bringing through our professional services and through our engagements with customers are most likely going to be kind of that last mile customization that's hyper specific and hyper personalized to them. It's hard to kind of reuse all of that, but eventually, like, zooming way out and, like, down the road, I definitely see a world where if we keep seeing the same problems pop up within the same vertical or the same persona over time, then we're going to start asking ourselves, all right, well, could we build something from scratch that's purpose built to solve all of these problems together? And think, anyone that's been in tech has got that muscle, because we've all felt the pain of, like, when everything is like custom to death, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think this actually dovetails nicely into a question that I wanted to ask you, Jerry. And I want to talk a little bit about your background here as well in the professional gambling space. But on this like note of uncertainty, right? Like in kind of ever evolving ecosystem of AI, we face this challenge a lot where by the time you finish a feature, something new has been introduced, the APIs have changed. Sometimes you have this feeling of like buyer's remorse where you're like, wait, but we just finished that and now there's this new hip thing. And so, how are you thinking about that at Penguin Hub? Can you kind of like walk us through a bit of your decision making approach? Like, if you're faced with incomplete information, how do you know to list something? Or, in the fast changing market conditions, how are you using uncertainty to kind of place those bets?
Sure. I love that you refer to it as the professional gambling space. I feel like that's a nicer description than it ever gets or probably deserves. Yeah, I spent many years as a poker player, and the kind of the crux of that world comes down to making optimal decisions with what is always incomplete information, right? So, like, I know what my cards are, I don't know what your cards are. Now I have to figure out a way to win despite that challenge. And it's kind of, in the early stages, like retraining your brain to focus on decisions and not results, and understanding that you can make a good decision, get a bad outcome, make a bad decision, and get a good outcome. One of the hardest things to kind of retrain your brain to understand is how to differentiate the two. And poker kind of brings that into hyper focus. And then, once you kind of have that down, you start to realize that actually that's kind of a good proxy for life in general, right? Like, that's the way the world works. That's definitely the way the business world works. And if you apply those same principles and those same concepts to how you make decisions in corporate America, or, most recently for me at Penguin Hub, as we try to build a startup, then it definitely pays off over time. Like, it really comes down to kind of understanding that there's certain things that are impossible to know, but based on what you do know, here's the most optimal decision possible. And now let's, watch what happens, learn, and iterate.
Yeah, absolutely. How does that play in at Penguin Hub? When are you guys like, if you see a new tool, how do you determine if it's right for the marketplace or if you're not going to include it? Can you kind of walk us through that?
What I do know about Penguin Hub is kind of our original mission and purpose, and the principles that we've kind of decided on around that, of we want to make AI accessible to small businesses. So when we start to evaluate a new tool or a new partnership or a new conversation of some kind, there's been like lots of, we'll call them shiny objects, that have popped up that are like way outside of that mission, that seem like they'd be cool, and they might make sense, but then when we kind of go back to core principles, it's like, if we chase after everything, then we're not going to get anything done. So let's try to maintain that focus and continue to think about our mission and our principles. And as we make those decisions to try to connect with small businesses, that ends up that's been our guiding light thus far. And I think like then the decision becomes, okay, well, kind of within the decisions that we've made, we've got all of these solutions on our marketplace, and we've got all these existing partnerships. Are we optimizing those to the extent possible, or are we kind of getting as much out of those as we can? And the answer is no, probably not. And that's where like we're looking to kind of iterate on what we've already built and make it more kind of more effective, more valuable to the customers, and then drive more conversions. And then it becomes that like infinite game of just like chasing the dragon is how I always think of it. You're never actually going to reach that like finish line or perfection, but you're always going to be chasing it. And as long as you kind of instill that into your decision making, then you're headed in a good direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the values-based decision making. Does this really make it accessible, or is it an accessible tool? Does it work for small business use cases? Or you kind of, the best way I've always heard this put is that to be inclusive and specific requires being clear about who you're excluding. And I think that that's a really powerful way to approach the marketplace so that you can, retarget with more specificity. You can, have your ideal customer profiles really dialed. And that is what ultimately will benefit the marketplace on both sides, right? So you know
Exactly.
the tool and you also know who you're trying to like serve is really interesting.
And it comes down to like thinking about just because it's a not right now doesn't mean that it's a no forever, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask the question, like, kind of going back on that values like approach, where you kind of, you have like the viewpoint that you take for each situation. Like, how have you seen things change, like since AI has come out in the software industry, where things you took for granted or thought of them as like maxims or truths before have changed? Like, if you have these specific examples.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of joke about like it's where you like sit down and you try to make this like big robust plan. And by the time you're done writing it, like all your assumptions are no longer valid because everything's like past you, right? And it's cool and exciting to be part of this like insanely fast pace of change. So I think where I've seen it gone is kind of in the very very early stages. I think people were mostly scared. Like I think like AI still sounded like some big scary thing that only tech people were going to know about, and it was only going to be relevant for them. And then I think uh, like Chat GPT through like exercises almost exactly like what you were describing earlier, Eli, around like you just like turn on the voice and let people talk to it. The least technical people in the world just have a conversation with an LLM. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay. And I feel like that is happening kind of at scale across like society. So like there's this like slow, like kind of progression of like first it starts with like, being scared or being like, oh, that's not my thing, that's other people or tech thing. And then there's awareness that there's this AI thing out there that's happening. And then that awareness kind of grows into this consideration of like, well, if it can do that just in like a quick conversation, like, can this potentially help my business or help me in my day-to-day life? And then it kind of starts you on this journey, and we're trying to meet you kind of right at that sweet spot of you're now considering like, all right, like what can AI do for me, not really knowing anything more specific than that. And then we're trying to meet our customers right at that sweet spot, which easier said than done also. But
No,
that
absolutely. I like to describe it as like, I don't know. I've been reading a lot of 3-year-old books with my child, so like it's just going to be a child's book reference. But like it's like the book If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, where it's like I used to know what the cookie was. Where it's like, oh, if I build somebody a form and show them what I could do, then they'll be more interested and want to pay us more, and we'll start to build out a product, etc. And it's like now all of a sudden I can deliver like an entire freaking truckload of cookies to their house on day one and say, "What do you want next?" And it's like a totally different situation to approach that
exactly
was in
like
the past, right?
yeah, it's crazy like how accessible it's making technology. Like I was telling you guys earlier, like I'm not a programmer by trade. I like took a couple of programming classes and did not do well in them over the course of my life. So I'm not super technical, but I understand technology just like well enough to understand that it can help me with certain things. So, in the early stages of Penguin Hub, when I was like, all right, I need to go out and identify, what types of solutions are out there, almost like do like a survey of the marketplace or of the internet, and get a sense of like who we want to partner with, who's doing what. And instead of me manually going to hundreds of websites, I was like, man, it'd be so awesome if I could just have a web crawler. And I was like, well, I mean, maybe I can, right? So like started talking to Claude, started like some prompt engineering, and then like started iterating with, and next thing I know, I built like a fairly elaborate, fairly robust web crawler that can kind of summarize, the segment of websites that I'm specifically interested in for me, so that I can more effectively engage with them in a way that's efficient. Like this would have been like weeks of work that, would just be so unbelievably tedious. And now instead of me spending my time doing that, I'm able to kind of look at the curated results and actually apply them. Like, I did not have the technical skills and still don't to actually do that on my own, but like AI just kind of makes
Right.
it more accessible.
Kind of like, this is a bit dramatic of a statement, but I'm just going to try to appear in the headlines. Like, what do you think about the concept of like the end of SaaS, where it's like, let's say someone goes to your like a service like yours, and instead of like, linking to other services, you link to just like generic services like accountant, and then you spin up accounting based software that is very similar to existing accounting based softwares for like a fraction of the cost. I mean, you see people doing this all the time with agents, like the Replit agent specifically. Like,
That's the right word for it. Is like SaaS is going to be replaced by the word agent or agents, right?
right? And like the only problem is scale, but most of the businesses we're talking about, the scale is not the issue. It's like
Yeah,
it's just having someone build customized software for them is virtually impossible at this point, right?
right. The biggest barrier to kind of reaching those inflection points and kind of having that transition happen, in my opinion, is less around like AI's ability to do it and more around like all the legacy inertia around these existing SaaS solutions or these legacy products that are kind of like, entire businesses are built around your CRM connecting with your, ABM marketing tool connecting with your legal database, like entire
Right? Absolutely.
companies, right? And then, if you just sat there for a week with like the right combination of LLMs, or, built some bespoke agents to kind of replace all of that, like that it's a game changer. But then you got to like figure out how you like deploy those effectively, and kind of do the, I always call it the Indiana Jones statue trick, where you like time it perfectly, right?
Totally, yeah. I mean, and I call it where it's like I used to believe that technology alone was sufficient to convince people that they should just switch to things, right? And it's like, but then I worked in banking technology for a while, and it was like on a sales call where this guy, we had this way better technology than the one they were using by a bajillion. Theirs was all configured. It was with this like legacy vendor, I'll go ahead and say it's Fiserv. And the guy was like, nah, the guy was like, I have played golf every week with the salesman for 25 years. And he was like, I'm not switching. And I was like, you can't, like, I don't know
You'll never win.
what
Yeah.
else to do. And like so
That's the
much of,
most disheartening moment, right? Like I had the same thing happen where I used to, when I was in tech, at a larger corporation, did want to keep this as generic as possible, but we had a solution. We were a smaller company competing with a behemoth, and our smaller solution was a data product that delivered data, and we were able to demonstrate that our data was better than the behemoth we were competing with. And we like
right?
showed the customer this, like start to finish, like full stop, this is correct. And I'll never forget the customer saying almost verbatim, well, this is different than their data. Can you just make your data the same as their data? And then I'll go with you guys. And like a little part of me just died. Like I was just like, no, the innocence was gone.
Then a big part of you might have said yes.
So
It's like, I know, like it was like the most frustrating thing where it's like, yeah, you want me to just like copy and paste with it? Like, come on, guys, like this is better. Like let's like it reminds me of like, I wasn't in tech back then or anything, but like when people talk about in the 80s, like that saying of like no one ever got fired for buying IBM. And like there's like an element of that too, right? Where like
It's one of the biggest elements for sure. It's just
yeah,
it's like observation. I mean, if you go with Microsoft for all these things, and then honestly, there's also there's like this counter element of like what is this double book Infragility or whatever, right? Where like the more they complain, the stronger they look as IT people. The more they say no to things as well. And so they become like a stronger entity, and then it becomes just like this whole culture at medium to large companies
Yeah.
potentially.
yeah.
The data topic is interesting, but I want to take it kind of to another direction. We talked about that journey of adopting AI. Change is hard, like we're talking about now. Change management, I think, is actually the biggest issue facing small, medium sized corporates, or even of course, to the enterprise level,
I feel like it's the
obviously.
biggest issue facing me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all around, right?
Personally.
Change management is the biggest problem with AI. But I'm curious on the data front, whenever people get over the initial fear, they kind of, hit excitement, they maybe try to adopt some tools. Inevitably, whether you're seasoned expert in the tech space or you're the mom and pop adopting one of these tools, the question crosses your mind of what's happening to my data or what's happening to my information. I'm worried about potentially sensitive information if I handle that, or I might not even actually have sensitive information, but as a business owner, I have concerns. And so I'm curious, like, how do you think about that at Penguin Hub whenever we're moving in such a fast or competitive space? Are you thinking about grading or like kind of providing what's like responsibility type metrics of like, hey, Monday uses your data in this way compared to Asana, that's a comparable tool, uses your data in another way? Like, how do you think about those types of questions on the marketplace, or are you answering?
No, it's a great question, and we've definitely talked a lot about it. And actually, the example that you just gave is something that we've actively thought about of what would happen if we just added like another dimension to every single tool that is essentially almost like a spectrum of privacy, like where like your data is lock and key, stays in your system, there's no chance of them even seeing your data, all the way up to they're going to do what they want with your data, and that's part of what you're signing up for. And I think that it's still kind of early enough days for us that we're not ready to kind of make that assessment for the 100+ tools that are in our marketplace. But I think it's one of the things we're looking at very closely as something that's going to certainly add a lot of value to consumers within the marketplace, but is also just kind of the right thing to do. Like it's like something that all of us as consumers ourselves are certainly thinking about and wondering about, like whatever fear exists around AI, that's definitely the number one concern.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I think the most obvious like relationship will be that like a higher priced expensive tool may have more secure data practices compared to a free tool that will most likely use sub processors or have more affordable rates but use your data in different ways. And that kind of value exchange of T-chart comparison may not, like, SMBs might not even be like focused on that at their scales. But I think as what ChatGPT just crossed 40 million users, I think as it proliferates across the US, fast forward a year, 2 years from now, I think more people will be asking that question, right? So it's a good thing to have on the
But
radar.
yeah, but sorry, I was gonna say like it's also like an awareness thing. Like the point that you just made, I think all of us take for granted as like if you've been in the tech world, you just understand that there's like, the less you're paying, the more likely it is that they're making money, using your data or in some other way. And like I don't know that there's a ton of awareness outside of the tech world on that basic principle.
Yep. Yep, for sure.
I wonder if there's a slightly different way to phrase the same thing in a more generic. We often talk about this in the context of privacy, but I think there's a more generic packaging, which is if I introduce a tool, it's a lot like hiring an employee, where a great employee can kill my culture or can make my culture awesome or nudge it in the right direction. So we think about this like
in the AI terms, it's like vector sums, right? If I add, this is your business on Monday, this is your business on Amplitude, this is your business on Square. So what I think is really interesting is to say, not just like what's the private, like how good is the privacy policy, but to say, okay, you've got a restaurant. If you want to be a hipper restaurant, maybe you use Square. If you want to use something a bit more official, like if you want to have a more like white tablecloth type experience, let's say, maybe use Toast, right? Basic, because I find that as services provider, that's really what you're doing is you're trying to read through the tea leaves of what these companies are trying to say about the market that they're in and what path they're trying to put their customers on. That's a lot of what you do as technologists is say like, okay, if I've got a small business that's pretty dynamic in nature, that values informality, we'll put them on Trello. But if I think like they have a pretty broad definition of what their business is, maybe we'll use a GitHub project because they're willing to work with different. And I wonder if you think about that in these terms, if you can like run sort of the counterfactual of, hey, this is your business on X, this is your business on Y, and letting people, make that choice of why they might, choose Monday versus Trello versus, or maybe make it more agnostic. Say, why use OpenAI versus using Claude? Go up to the model level because there's those choices are happening at the model level as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is interesting because it comes back to an earlier point around the amount that you can know about your customer, once they hit the marketplace, whether it's a conversational type interface or some other sort of KYC type intake. If you know the vibe, you have a link to their site, you crawl their site, you pull their financials from public records. You say, hey, your profile matches a majority of people that are going to likely go with Monday. Here's why. We understand your vibe. Like, that's really interesting as opposed to like the verticalized, like, are you looking for accounting, coding, etc.? They might not even know categorically what they're interested in, but you might be able to ascertain enough about them that say, hey, most people like you are facing challenges with invoicing. Here, you should consider QuickBooks versus this versus this.
My only like pushback from the business side of that is that I think that people have a tendency to like I think that we're very much in like a bundling phase of AI where like the products will like if you think of tech as going in bundling and unbundling phases, which it does, but I'm not gonna prove that now. But like it's gonna bundle like those services. So it feels to me like it's like more like based off of what I've seen and just experience, feels more likely to me that there'll be like a vertical, like these are the 5 tools for like a nurse, like a nurse's office or for like eye doctor, etc. That would be more likely for you to sell as like a package bundle. Because I think right now there's so many services that it's not like people want like Madden stats on each individual service at this point because they wouldn't even know what to rank, right?
I think what the point is, the bundle is the vibe. Like
Yes.
the
Yeah,
bundle is
that's
not
what I'm
the
saying.
category, the
Said
bundle
could
is the
apply.
vibe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Everything you just said could apply to a bundle as well. Like that's just a level up in
Yeah.
the data model.
Yeah, I think like we're thinking about actually I just wrote a blog entry this morning that was something like the top 5 solutions for I want to say like voice like AI voice solutions. um we've talked about like kind of almost like a choose your own adventure experience on the website somewhere where you can kind of like raise your hand and answer like a handful of questions, like 4 or 5 questions, like a quiz or some kind of bot you interact with, or you give us a little bit of information about yourself or something like that, and then we give exactly these types of like more tailored recommendations based on all the factors that you guys are describing. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. I'd love to hear more about it as it evolves. So, being mindful of time, I want to ask you one last question, let you answer, and we'll get you out of here. So, looking ahead with the constant pace of change in AI, and the space is only set to grow over the next 5 to 10 years. What are you hopeful for, and how do you envision Penguin Hub contributing to that future? Where are you headed next?
I think there's kind of two interpretations of the future that we're headed towards now that AI is kind of growing and becoming a bigger part of everyone's lives. And one is a little bit more dystopian and is kind of like calls out some of the things that could happen from bad actors and some of the challenges it creates from like education perspective and other stuff like that. I think there's another version of that future where it kind of brings us all together in a way that's more positive. Like, it starts to eliminate a lot of the monotonous administrative stuff from our lives and from businesses. And it makes medicine more accessible to people that might not otherwise have access to it. It helps provide, mental health coaching and services to people that couldn't otherwise afford it, and the list goes on and on. And I kind of am inherently more of an optimist, and I want to kind of be part of building us toward that more optimistic and idealistic future. And I think the way Penguin Hub kind of plays its part is by being that translation layer and making AI as accessible and easy and usable for the masses as possible.
Absolutely. Well, and if I visit Penguin Hub and see a penguin in red glasses smiling at me, and that makes me smile, like I'm all for it, right? 5, 10 years down the road. So I love it. Thank you, Jerry, for joining us today. This was a super fun discussion to hear more. And thanks for sharing about the tool. I know we're looking forward to following your journey and hope to stay in touch. And if there's anything we can ever do for you, would love to be a resource for you as well. So never hesitate to reach out, man, or just share stories and get advice.
Yeah, you have no idea how good it feels to talk to someone that's doing something similar to us. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate you guys for having me. I'm going to make it out to Colorado to go skiing at some point this winter. So I'll definitely give you guys a call.
Sounds good. Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks a lot for the time, guys. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one, guys. Take care.